Hi, I'm ChapClark, and I get to teach at a place called Fuller Seminary, but it's not teaching at a seminary. I actually get to be hanging around youth workers, hanging around kids, being around people in churches and parachurch organizations. So I've kind of given my life to trying to help young people like you to come to know Christ and to follow Him well. So it's really an honor to be part of this thing and that you guys are taking time to look at this. And I'm going to talk about today understanding the kids that you're working with. How do we really get under the skin, under the behavior, under the external looks and attitudes of the kids that we work with? So to help us to get there, I just want you to begin to think about the students that you're around. And as you consider who they are, whether it's middle school, high school, even emerging adults, when you consider who they are, every human being was created by God to have these three longings. And these longings drive everything we are through our whole lifespan. And people that study human behavior and human life, and even people that study God, and theologians are called, know that part of the human condition are these three longings that God put in us. And here's what they are. So this is first, to really understand kids, these longings, and then how they're living out those longings. That's where we're going to be going in our short time together. But the three longings, the first one is, every one of us has the longing to be nurtured, to be... we say longing to be loved, but what does that really mean? It's really longing to be cherished, to be wanted, to be held. The idea that we have this driving desire for people to care enough about us to kind of come alongside of us so that we're not feeling like we're just swimming out there on our own. That's the first longing, to be nurtured and to be cared for. The second longing is seemingly different, almost the exact opposite of it. It's the longing to actually be in the game. What a lot of people talk about this is this longing to matter or to have purpose. That's really more the adult side of this thing. As a young person's growing up, as a student you're working with is growing up, not only do they long to have you nurture them, we'll talk about that, how we do that in a minute, but it's this longing to feel like they're important and that they matter and that they actually have an idea or have some skill or have some way to take who they are and to invest in something that makes a difference, which is every kid. If you think about all the students that you're working with, even if you're just working with one or two, the idea of they have this desire to be important and to be taken seriously. So that's that second longing, is to be empowered to serve and to have a mission and a purpose. And the third is all of us as well, is a longing to kind of belong to something bigger than ourselves. We know these three things. You know, I know that we want people to take us seriously, the longing to be nurtured. We want people to care about our participation, our investment in the game, and that's to be empowered. And thirdly, the longing to belong and to kind of connect. Well, that's throughout all of human history. Every person has always wanted that. So to understand your kids, you need to understand that what motivates them are those three longings, okay? To be nurtured, to be empowered, and to belong. Now here's where the game gets a little dicey, especially the last several decades. Without going into a lot of detail, what we do know about kids is the culture has changed dramatically in the last, not only last 50, 70 years, but the last 20 to 30 years, and kind of changing exponentially in this way. That for all of time, across every culture in human history, the society at large, adults saw young people, saw kids as being their most precious asset. And basically what took place over a lot of centuries was that began to erode and shift a little bit from the point of life was to pass on the legacy of caring for the young as they grew up, into being the point of life is to make sure that my three longings are met, that I make my mark, which led into kind of this hyper-competitive, hyper-individual way of living. Now, none of us really want to go there or say that that's what we're all about. We recognize the need for being in community and being together. But when people study these things, they look at these two words that are, I know fancy words are kind of, I hate to use them, but social capital, when you put those two things together, capital is where we have resources. Social capital are people resources. And that's essentially what we do in youth ministry. That's who you are. You are God's social capital to the kids that you work with. And so we bring our social capital, we bring our commitment to caring for kids in Jesus' name. Doug's talked about in one of these videos, the relational aspect of youth ministry, which really is not one thing we do, it's the core of what we do. Well, that's what social capital is we commit to kids to saying we're gonna be there for you. But to understand your middle school kids, teenagers, young adults, emerging adults in your ministry, even if it's just one or two of your own children, you need to recognize that social capital has begun to really erode over the last 3 or 4 decades. There's a guy named Robert Putnam from Harvard, if you want to look into this more. He wrote a great book 15 years ago called Bowling Alone. And he's written a new one that just came out in 2015, where he talks about our kids, America's dream in crisis, where not only is this thing called social capital, adults' investment in kids, where we invest in them by giving them school, we give them sports, we give them opportunities, we give them SAT tutors, we give them batting coaches, but do we actually give them ourselves? See, in youth ministry, what can easily happen with us is we think that we're small group leaders. We're not small group leaders. We do small groups, but we are God's, as Philip Yancey puts it, dispensers of His grace to every kid in our small group. We're investing in relationships so that kids can see Jesus first in us, and then they can begin to see Jesus for themselves and then in community. So that's what we do. We bring social capital, those 3 longings. They have the longing to be nurtured. Well, we bring our lives and our relationships to them in order to make sure they know they're cared for in our ministry, whether it's in the church or parachurch. They have this longing to be empowered. And that's what most of us don't do a great job of in youth ministry. I know I haven't over the years, trying to figure out, how do I both nurture a kid, care for them, listen to them, and then at the same time empower them, give them vision and a mission and a way to have their voice matter. And thirdly, belonging. Well, we think belonging is just having them feel safe at youth group or in our small group, or even going to Starbucks with them or whatever we do. But the belonging God has in mind for them is a much bigger belonging, and that's where the church comes in. Now, I need to add one more piece to this. I've talked about the 3 longings of kids, and I've talked about how social capital addresses those 3 longings, because they all come together as people surround them. But in the last few decades, there's been such a breakdown in social capital that people are called atomized or individuals. And kids have grown up in this culture today where their sense of self, their sense of nurture, their sense of value and worth and even belonging has become a whole lot more about their ability to perform to our expectations as adults. Now we know this in like youth sports. So an 8-year-old kid who, you may say, I love you, but you just strike out all the time, so you're not going to play anymore. That's kind of a very simple example. But you take that to everything else in a kid's life, from the various agendas that adults have for them at school, to sports, to music, to dance, to drama, to even in the family where parents will easily say, I love you, but how come you're not going to start this week? I love you, how come your room's such a mess? I love you, but why do you have those friends? There's always this kind of but at the end of our affirmation of kids. And that really means that kids go, well, where do I go to receive that social capital I want, even though they never put it that way? Here's what they've learned. Here's a little kind of phrase for you to hold on to. In today's world, the kids that we are working with, that you're working with, know they are expected to perform their way into blessing, as opposed to receive blessing and out of that live their lives that honors Christ and honors their journey. In other words, life should not be primarily about performance and competition. Life has to be about, I'm part of the game. I'm in. I matter. People care about me. And therefore, I can care about them, and then I'm going to live into who I am. And so that's not really performance. That is simply being who they are. And the best way I know how to get at all this, to help understand kids, is they're living in a world of performance and conformity where adults have them in all these agendas. They have these 3 longings. They need to have people in their lives. Well, when it really comes down to it, a great passage for you to look up is 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. where Paul says in chapter 2, verse 1, our visit to you is not a failure. Today, nobody visits kids. Today, we receive kids maybe when they show up. But really, our ministry is about visiting them with our hearts, not just texting them because they didn't show up for 3 weeks, and not just being kind to them when they come to youth group, but to really having this attitude of all the youth leaders and just each one of us individually in all our programs to make sure kids know that we are there in the name of Christ to come alongside them, to visit them, to encourage and nurture them, to help empower their gifts, to give them vision for a mission that God would have for them, and to make sure they know that they belong to God's household, God's family. So those 3 longings, don't forget, every single kid, every attitude, every behavior comes with those 3 longings, and they need us to have capital, and that capital means we go. 1 Thessalonians 2:1. So I hope you can understand your kids a little more deeply because of this. Thank you for your work and your mission and your ministry to these precious kids. And we're all in this game of youth ministry together. Thanks so much.